Bring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Turn up the volume, strap yourselves in, and welcome to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Dan, you know something? I have given out a number of 2-week notices in my lifetime. You know, I've moved around a lot since my first job back in my high school days when I was 18 years old. And I've had my fair share of 2-week notices. But I will tell you this, the 2-week notice that I gave this morning on Twitter was by far the most gratifying and also annoying 2-week notice that I've ever given, because we just recorded on Monday, and what was it, 17 days away from the NFL draft when we did that, our offensive line breakdown. We are now 14 days away from the NFL draft, and I feel like you and I haven't talked for a week.
Bare naked ladies times 2. That's how many days we have left. Please tell me you get this reference.
I mean, I get it, but anybody else that doesn't get it, would you want to elaborate?
No, they can figure it out. Bare naked ladies times 2. Listeners, tell me what you think. Moving on.
All right.
Jake, we have a jam-packed discussion today. We can't waste any time.
No.
We are talking all things cornerback, CBs. We're going to talk about guys in the first round who we're going to trade back with potentially as a second round, maybe early second, late first, maybe day 3. But before we get into that, Jake, I think it's probably important that we just kind of set the stage with this current state of the Los Angeles Chargers on why the cornerback position is actually, and I would say pretty obviously, the second most important position for this Chargers team to fill.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to understand why the Chargers, obviously, but right before free agency began, they released longtime veteran Casey Hayward. They let him walk, freeing up a bunch of cap space before free agency got started. But then they used some of that cap space to then re-sign their number 2 cornerback, Michael Davis, to a 4-year deal. But the Chargers still, even though they have Chris Harris coming back at the nickel spot, they still have a big void to fill across from Michael Davis. And this cornerback class is definitely not short on talent. The Chargers can find it in a multitude of different ways. But if you're looking for a corner to pair with Michael Davis to put in the same secondary as a Derwin James and really round out this secondary to bring it back to some form of glory, number one, this is the draft to definitely find it in, especially with the Chargers draft position at 13. But you could definitely find some talent in some later rounds too.
There are some gems in this draft class. And look, there are many guys that will say we need to get a corner early on in this draft, and they're probably not wrong. But the corners that are going to be there in round 2, if we don't take one in round 1, there are some damn good corners in this draft. I mean, I can't wait to get into this. You and I both, I think, have been looking at these corners for months now. And we've talked to some of them. We've had in-person interviews with some of them. I'm ready to get after it. It's going to be fun. This is a good one.
Let me preface this real quick before we jump into the first player we're about to talk about. Number one, Dan was super stoked about this conversation that 5 minutes before we came on, he sent out a tweet saying, I've studied 22 cornerbacks and I'm basically ready to go to war with me on this podcast over these cornerbacks that we're going to be talking about.
I'm ready.
We should preface this that, you know, I'm not going to call it an excuse, but Dan Wolkenstein has actually verbally talked personally to a number of these cornerbacks that we are about to talk to because, you know, back in the old days, he had the credentials to do so. So, yeah, he's got a little bit of a slight advantage over me, but I'm not going to let that. I'm not going to be making any excuses for that. But there's a lot of play. If you thought last week's offensive tackle breakdown was big and long, yeah, get ready for this. So let's jump into this, Dan. So the first game we're going to talk about is, let's start off with talk about Patrick Surtain, because the draft class, especially for the top 3 guys, has really been turned upside down over the last month as far as who the number 1 guy is, and whether it's by injury or talent, it really fluctuates depending on who you ask. But I would say majority consensus, if you took the poll of the analysts out there, the people out there, and again, not everybody, but I would think as of right now, most people still rate Patrick Surtain as the number 1 corner in this class. So let's just talk about him first. Now, in all likelihood, Patrick Surtain is going to be gone by the time that the Chargers draft at 13. But if he is still there, you talk about a guy who, most people would say that he fits best in a cover 3, but with his versatility, he's got the capabilities of playing in any scheme. He just is, and he's versatile enough that you could put him anywhere and succeed. He's pro ready. Again, it just has terrific size for the position at 6'2", 38 consecutive starts in Alabama. Definitely their most consistent defender that they had. And there is so much talent to be had with Patrick Surtain. Dan, what do you see when you put the tape on and when you watch him?
So interestingly enough, the first thing that jumps out to me is just he is an imposing physical specimen. You watch him go up against wide receivers, and he always seems to be in the right position. Imposing, is a ball hawk. Like you said, versatility, can play off man and press, I think, very well. Boy, does he have swag for days. Super long arm, always composed. I mean, this guy was a unanimous All-American in 2020. You hear people throw around comparisons all the time, but you put a little more stock into those who actually played with the other folks they're comparing to. His own safeties coach at Alabama compares Patrick Surtain to a Jalen Ramsey, which I put more stock into because he actually coached Jalen Ramsey when he was at Florida State. Now, I would say Patrick Surtain is arguably the best corner in this draft for a few different reasons. But if you were to just average out Surtain, Horn, and Farley, I would say Surtain has had the most consistent grade throughout this entire offseason pre-draft process. Horn and Farley have flipped, in my opinion. It feels like Surtain has kind of stayed even keel the whole way. So this was a marathon. Surtain is winning.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Just I think, and now obviously with all the attention that's gone to Surtain over the last month or so, as people had Caleb Farley rated above him for a long period of time. And now, of course, everything's fluctuating because some people will still believe that Jaycee Horn is their number 1 type of guy. And I think that just people still, the stats didn't really jump out at you big time as it related to, only 9 passes defended and 1 interception this past season. As far as just those playmaking type of abilities, he didn't stack the stat box, if you will, but he just shuts opposing wide receivers and tight ends down. And then again, you go to his pro day. I can't remember if Jaycee Horn and Surtain ended up having their pro day on the same day. But you talk about 2 guys that both impressed at their pro days. Again, Surtain ran a 4.42, broad jump to 11 inches, had a vert of 39 inches, totaled 18 reps of 225 on the bench press. Again, Dan, you mentioned his physicality, his aggressiveness, his swagger. Everything that you want to see out of a starting defensive back in the NFL, this guy has it. The term pro ready, as far as a player goes, if it's about any defensive back in this draft, it's definitely Patrick Surtain. But
Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. Patrick Surtain is arguably the best defender in this draft, most pro ready NFL defender in this draft, for good reason. Look at his father, Go watch the tape. This guy is just so smooth, so ready, composed. Nothing surprises him. There's a reason he has been mocked so high in this draft and consistently, to where people kind of start sleeping on him. You kind of forget. And it kind of reminds me of like the Penny Sewell comparison back in the day, where like people all of a sudden, Rashawn Slater, he's an offensive tackle 1. And I'm like, guys, like, no. Patrick Surtain, like, I think people just forget how good and how consistent he has been. There's a reason why he's top 3 corner in this draft. He may be the first one off the board.
I'll give you one piece of advice, though. Yes, a lot of people believe that Patrick Surtain is the number 1 corner in this draft. Some people would argue that Caleb Farley is still, even injuries aside, still the best cornerback in this draft. Don't tell Jaycee Horn that. Don't do it, because he's on a mission to make you pay for those words. Anybody that is throwing any doubt or shade in Jaycee Horn's direction, he's listening to every bit of it. If you haven't seen what he's tweeted about the people over at PFF, one person in particular who did not even believe that he was worthy of being a first-round pick in this draft, trust me, Jaycee Horn is listening to all of that. Now, Jaycee Horn has garnered so much hype since his pro day. 4.39 on the 40, a 41.5-inch vert, and an 11.1 broad jump. Dan, you mentioned the aspects of Surtain's game reminding you of a Jalen Ramsey, and I get that. From the size standpoint, that's all there. And like you had mentioned, the familiarity with the defensive backs, the defensive coordinator, that all makes sense. But Jaycee Horn is another guy that a lot of people believe would be in that type of Jalen Ramsey mold for Brandon Staley's defense. Started 29 of his 30 games at South Carolina. Picked off 2 passes and broke up 6 in 2020. This guy just has quick feet. I love his technique to mirror receivers. Extremely athletic, physical, strong, great type of a frame. And again, you talk about a guy that has swagger. He drips it. And for cornerbacks, you need that at that next level. So I really like what I've seen out of Jaycee Horn. And, you know, you talk about Jaycee Horn 2-3 months ago, people were predicting that he was going to fall in like the late teens. And now he's rocketed up draft boards to where he could potentially either be the Chargers pick at 13. He may even be taken just before that. So he has been on a meteoric rise since his pro day just about a month ago.
He has. And there's a reason why Chargers fans have gotten more and more involved in the hype train of Jaycee Horn. He has met with the Chargers several times. In his pro day, I actually got a chance to ask Jaycee Horn about his relationship with the Chargers. Let's take a listen.
Hey, JC, Dan Wolkenstein. I've covered the Chargers here in LA. Want to ask you, they're looking for a lot of help at corner. There's a bunch of things that you do well, and you're looked at as kind of one of the top 3, if not the top. So I guess a 2-part question. One, have you talked with the Chargers and how you see yourself fitting there? And the second question is, what do you hang your hat on as a corner that might separate yourself from the rest of the pack?
I was in Orange County training, so I like the views out there. And I talked to the Chargers a couple of times. Me and Coach Ansley, had history back in high school. He recruited me to come to Bama, so we had some history in Derwin. I linked up with him a couple of times. We were part of the same agency. Got the same agent here, real cool dude. It'll be great to be able to play with the Chargers. And for your second question, I hang my hat on press man to man. I feel like to be a great corner, you got to be good at that. And also my IQ and just my competitiveness, how I attack the field, and how I attack every game in practice and even in the meeting room. So those are some of the things I hang my hat on.
So very interesting comments there from Jaycee Horn, not just as you had mentioned, Dan, that we found out about his familiarity with the coaches and the team for how much he's met with them, but a certain defensive back that's currently with the Chargers.
Not
nice
bad.
Familiarity to have.
Not bad. not bad. Ainsley was working with him in high school. Was trying to recruit him. Talked to Derwin James. Met with the Chargers a few times. Definitely connections that you like to see. Jaycee Horn is so fun to watch. I mean, and he actually has a really, really cool story. He opted out this past season to be with his family during the pandemic. I don't know if you heard about this, Jake. And specifically wanted to be with his grandparents and his aunt. And unfortunately, his aunt actually passed away this past year. I believe it was due to COVID. But he wanted to spend time with his family, and family comes first, family above everything for him. And he was asked about this on his pro day, and I believe he told anyone, like, if I had to do it again, I absolutely make the same decision again. That's why he didn't play in 2020. But he has priorities in line. I mean, it's family first for him. But then, like you said, it is all about football. The guy's he's physically imposing, 6'1", 200 plus. You said 4.37 at his pro day. I think he's probably best at press man coverage. I think he mentioned that he's kind of hangs his hat on press man and his competitiveness. He's kind of one of those guys, like you mentioned, Jalen Ramsey, where you just put him on the opposing best receiver and just let him go to work. The one thing that was really interesting that I read up on him was he was asked about what it was like going up against SEC talent. And in high school, he mentioned that he had met with Nick Saban. And one of the things that Nick Saban had told him was being in the SEC is the closest thing he's going to get to the NFL. And when Coach Saban had told him that, he said he was going to go to the SEC no matter what, and felt it was the best decision he ever made because it's great competition week in and week out. And you're always going to have a guy on the other team that's a high caliber player that can get you ready for the next level. I think he picked right. Mm-hmm. And for someone to be able to do that well. Now, granted, there is tape of some other bona fide receivers who have done well against him, but there's tape of that for every receiver and every corner. But in terms of Jaycee Horn, you could tell he just has an edge. He has a fight, and he loves proving people wrong. And I love that about him. And he has just that like edge to him that he kind of reminds you of Jalen Ramsey, where you just don't want to mess with him. Like he comes at you and he's already mentally winning before you even snap the ball.
Now, Dan, I'm going to let you take the lead on the next guy that we have to talk about, because he's had a lot of movement in the last month or so as far as his draft stock goes. Not because of his lack of talent, definitely not. But he's had to answer some injury questions over the last couple of months. People start connecting the dots when you start looking at injury histories going back, over the last couple of years, looking at other back injuries, looking at torn ACL, I believe it was back in 2017. But Caleb Farley, we need to talk about him. And not necessarily, normally we're tiering these much like we did with the offensive tackles, where we're looking at the big three that the Chargers could potentially go with at 13. Now, me personally, I would love for Caleb Farley to be on this team. Do I see the Chargers taking him at 13? We even asked the same question for Trevor Sikkema from the Draft Network just a couple of weeks ago. And even he felt that if the Chargers were to do it, he would even be a little bit surprised if they took him at 13. So I don't see the Chargers taking him at 13. I see a bigger possibility that the Chargers trade down to say 19, 20, that it would make more sense from a value standpoint for the Chargers to take him there. But Dan, I know that this is your boy, so I'm going to let you take the reins on Caleb Farley. Go.
This one hurts because hands down, I don't think it's even close. Caleb Farley is the most physically gifted corner in this draft. And it's not close. If he was not quote unquote injury risk with his quote unquote back issues, he would be the first corner off the board. And it's not even a question. And for folks who have forgotten, Caleb Farley was first team All-ACC in 2019, led the league with 16 pass breakups, and started 23 of 24 games in his career. He actually was an all-state quarterback in high school, and also began at Virginia Tech as a wide receiver before transitioning into corner. The reason why people are down on Caleb Farley, I would say, one, is because of the quote-unquote injury concerns, and 2, just because of the sheer number of times he has lined up at corner. He does not have that many reps at corner compared to those other 2 guys we just talked about. But there's no question that he is superior in physical traits. No question that I think he's a better lockdown corner. He is more smooth than both of them. He is always in control. I think his instincts are the best of the 3. And him having that competition in those reps at wide receiver, I think he has much better ball hawking skills than the other 2.
Yes.
And just his instincts are amazing. And you see his experience at wide receiver come to play when you watch him just stick to receivers like glue and connects to them, and oftentimes will run their route better than they do. When folks say Jalen Ramsey, this is who I actually think reminds me of Jalen Ramsey. And much like I said before all of the injury stuff happened, Caleb Farley is the perfect fit for Brandon Staley's defense. Now, Jaycee Horn would also fit well. Patrick Surtain would also fit well. But a healthy Caleb Farley under Brandon Staley and Ronaldo Hill, given his versatility, paired with a Derwin James and a Nazir Adderley and a Chris Harris, that is freak athlete. And you think Brandon Staley, if they traded down and they're looking at like 18 or hell, even 13, do you think he likes watching his name go by? Hell no. I would argue this is probably, it's either him or it is Surtain that are the top 2 on Brandon Staley's board. I would put money on it.
There's not a lot that I could add to that, those remarks for Caleb Farley. Dan, I see the exact same thing when I put on the tape about him. Again, the biggest thing to me that stands out when I watch him is his closing and recovery speed. It's insane at just how, like you had mentioned, he's always in the vicinity, whether it's to make a pass breakup, an interception, or a tackle. He's there. He has that agility and that straight line speed for those coverage type duties. You'd also mentioned the ball skills, much more. That's where you're going to see a lot more of those playmaking abilities over the Patrick Surtains. That gives him that value, that put him up high enough that where people were talking about just over a month ago as him being the number 1 cornerback in this class. So again, from my standpoint, Dan, I know that as we're not necessarily differing on his talent as a prospect, but for me, just giving the injury histories, reading the tea leaves, and then of course going into this team's history of drafting injured players, or
which is fair.
Which is fair. And again, that's where most of my weight comes in this conversation. Dan, I know that you would have no issue whatsoever if the Chargers stood pat at 13 and the pick was Caleb Farley. I know you would probably actually be tap dancing. And you would be pounding the table saying, this was the right pick. Dan is one of the few people that is not on the offensive tackle or bust train at 13. And Caleb Farley is one of these guys that he would be totally okay with at 13. Would I love Caleb Farley in this team? You bet your ass I would. But 13, I side with Trevor Sikkema. 13 just might be a little bit too rich for my blood. The conversation for me at where Caleb Farley could probably start seeing himself in the conversation is at the Arizona Cardinals at 16 and probably down from there. So if the Chargers were to trade back in any scenario, I would totally be fine with them selecting Caleb Farley if they were in that type of situation.
If the Chargers picked Caleb Farley at 13, I would probably be a little surprised, but I would also be excited. But larger scope, if the Chargers came out of the first round and Caleb Farley was on this team, I would be doing cartwheels. If it was between getting Caleb Farley at 13 and not getting Caleb Farley, I think I'd rather have Caleb Farley.
I love how you put that. If it was between getting Caleb Farley at 13 or not getting Caleb Farley at 13, I think I'd rather have Caleb Farley at 13.
No, okay, but I think this is probably where we differ. Is I don't see Caleb Farley making it to the late teens, early 20s. I just don't see it. This seems like those smokescreen conversations where people are just trying to find ways to get his stock to go down, but GMs are smarter than that. Jake, I talked to Caleb Farley personally, and I asked him about the issue he had with his back.
I know with all the news going on with potential surgery, impact, and where that kind of has you fitting in the draft, how do you see that impacting yourself, and where do you see yourself stacking up for NFL teams here in the draft?
Yes, I'm a Chargers fan. I got an old teammate, Brandon Faison, who's out there currently playing corner for the Chargers. I've had a good friend and mentor in Casey Hayward, who also played for the Chargers. So, I would say I'm a Chargers fan. And as far as for the surgery, I had a procedure done Tuesday, a discectomy on the S1, which was really stimulates from, my previous injury from a deadlift, which I had herniated my L5 and bulged my S1, but at the time, we chose to move forward and operate on the herniation of L5, thinking that S1 was not an issue, which it gave me immediately relief back then, and I was able to train and be basically wasn't physically limited for a year, but instead of operating on the S1, gave it a chance to heal on its own, which it had a good chance to do. But unfortunately, just, a month ago, I had kind of flared it up, inflamed it. I had got advised to go ahead and fix it instead of trying to keep waiting and hoping it would heal on its own, because at the end of the day, being so active and being an athlete and always training and doing things like that, your disc really isn't going to have the time to just, heal and be reabsorbed back into the body like a normal person. So I was advised to go ahead and, get the procedure done on it. And I'm glad it's not a reoccurrence of the same thing. I'm checked out. My previous procedure done is intact. It looks great. And, I'm excited to have move forward from this.
Look, if it was me, if injuries were not a thing, I would stack rank these: Farley, Horn, Surtain. But all three are bona fide corners. All three, I could see why they would be CB1s. Outside of injuries, would you agree?
I would. I was going to ask you as far as how close are each one of these guys. We always talk about Penei Sewell being the top sure-handed offensive tackle, and then from there it's like a massive drop. But really, how close do you have these three guys?
That's an interesting one, because I think these three are very close, and I think it really just comes down to your flavor of choice, what kind of corner you want. I think Caleb Farley is the well-rounded, is like the Swiss Army knife that can kind of literally do anything. I see Patrick Surtain as like the seasoned vet, this very savvy savant, one who's never going to get rattled by anything. And then Jaycee Horn just seems like that physical specimen that coaches would just love to have their hands on. So which one of those three would you like? All three are great. It just depends on who you are as a coach or as a GM, or what your team dynamic looks like. But all three of these guys realistically should be great corners in the NFL.
So those are the top three options for the Chargers, possibly, and Dan would include this, at 13. For me, it'd be a slightly trade down for one of them. But this is how we normally pair everything together, with the top possibilities at the Chargers at 13. Now, when we come back after the break, we're going to look at some of the potentials that, if the Chargers happen to do something that I've been clamoring for years, and that is trade down, if they still decided to go corner in the first round, who could they possibly be looking at? We're going to talk about that next week. Come back. Chargers Unleashed.
Hey yo, what's my name? DMX, and I be the best. You see the rest, they looking like they need a rest. One more time. I'ma spit at you some hits.
Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Welcome back to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. We are continuing to talk nothing but cornerbacks on today's show. We're going to be talking about next the group of cornerbacks that if the Chargers should trade down in the first round and still be looking to take a corner, who could they potentially be looking at? But before we jump into that, a little reminder, Dan, talk to the people.
First off, we have to just say how incredible our listeners, our followers, our quote-unquote fans, our stands, if you want to call them that. You guys are all amazing. We have gone through quite the process the last month or so. We are so happy to be with the LA Football Network. But we did start brand new with our socials. And Jake, within, a week? We have gotten over 750 followers already on Twitter, which is like insane. Did not see that coming.
Nope.
One of the reasons why, though, is we have a pretty amazing giveaway that we have going on. And that has been sponsored by Charger Bolt Family, who's actually an incredible resource for all Chargers fans who are looking for memorabilia to get signed by some of their favorite players. They are on Facebook. Talk to Ken. Tell him I say hello. Jake, they have had Kenneth Murray. They have had LaDainian Tomlinson, Darren Sproles, Keenan Allen, Derwin James, Hunter Henry in the past. All of them. And they have them constantly. Justin Herbert was just done again. They just actually talked to Drew Brees as well. But with that, they actually provided us with a triple signed mini helmet by Hunter Henry, Keenan Allen, and the GOAT himself, Antonio Gates. And we are going to be giving it out the night before. Is it the night before or the day of? I don't remember.
Night before, we will be announcing the winner.
Night before the draft, we're going to be announcing the winner. To enter, all you need to do is go on to Twitter, retweet the tweet that is on our profile for your chance to win the triple signed Chargers helmet with Antonio Gates, Keenan Allen, and Hunter Henry. Charger Bolt Family, check them out on Facebook. They are the real deal. I actually just got a Justin Herbert signed mini helmet about a couple months ago. It is legit. Charger Bolt Family, they're the best. I wonder if they'll be having our next corner. I bet you they do. But let's talk about, Jake, the next tier of corners are the ones that are going to fall probably a bit outside the top 15, but most likely will stay in round one.
Yes, sir.
And if the Chargers trade back away from 13, pick up draft capital, who are the guys that we can focus on? Let's talk about them. Number 1, Greg Newsome. Jake, I will give you the floor.
So Greg Newsome, I've really liked what I watched from him, especially when we were in the dog days of the regular season, and instead of watching the Chargers, losing games when they were 3-9, I would rather put on tape of Greg Newsome and watch something that actually was making me happy during that point in time. I just really like what I see from this kid. Another big-bodied cornerback. I think his ability. I know that he hasn't had the easiest road to the NFL, especially, he's dealt with some injuries during his college career, didn't even get to finish this last year, even though it was under a truncated type year. But still, even in the short season of 2020, still amassed 12 tackles, 1 interception, and a team high 10 pass breakups. I really like the fact that when I look at him, I just see, I think he's very refined for a DB. Very high football IQ when it comes to his movement. In zone coverage, I think he does a really nice job when he comes up to defenders. And he just has those ball skills to cover in deep zone scenarios. So, again, very solid frame type of a guy. I really like his potential that he's going to bring at the next level. Just has the right overall size for it. Long limb type of a DB, good strength, good physicality, especially in press man coverage. And I just like the games that I've seen from him. And again, talk about what you will as far as just him battling injuries throughout his college career. But when he was on the field, how about this, Dan? Allowing only a 31.6 completion rate. Not too shabby. Again, I think best scenario for him is probably, I mean, again, I still think he's versatile enough to play in both cover 3 schemes and press man. Probably maybe a better fit for cover 3. People may battle me on that, but I mean, I think I see him best fit as a cover 3, but I still think that he can play both very, very well. So I really like what I see from him a lot. I personally felt that, back when we first started talking about him, we were possibly talking about him in round 2, and man, things have changed since December and January, obviously. So again, this is another scenario that if the Chargers trade back and are still looking to spend their first round pick on a DB, I would be very happy with Greg Newsome.
Oh, totally. I mean, 6'1", great size. I think he's a really good cover corner. You mentioned about his athleticism. I think he has amazing instincts. He seems to always be in control, great composure. Jake, I'll raise you a statistic. Did you know that Mr. Greg Newsome did not allow a single third down completion the entire 2020 season?
How about that?
Named a 2020 AP All-America and first team All-Big Ten. Greg Newsome's the real deal. He is a bona fide first-round corner. I don't see him falling past, 22, maybe. The dude has it all. He's kind of in that next tier, right below those top 3. But again, a very, very solid corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another guy who I think, now, this is a little bit of a stretch because Elijah Molden out of Washington, and you've heard me say this a number of times on the show, Dan, I have a category for a number of different players in this draft, regardless of position, whether it's DB, wide receiver, anything like that. It falls into the size be damned category. And I put Elijah Molden in this category. Now, do I think that Elijah Molden would be somebody that the Chargers would take as far as if you wanted a good defensive back player, then by all means go ahead and make the pick. But as far as the fit goes and who's currently on this team as far as personnel goes, I don't happen to see it just based off of need, because I look at Elijah Molden and I see his best fit as a nickel corner or a nickel safety. I think that's where he could do his best work. Even still, his read and react, his football IQ, he's a very, very intelligent defensive back. He recognizes route development very, very fast, very strong tackler, plays with good technique, good patience, plays the ball well enough consistently. It can even really contends with receivers very well at the catch point. So he definitely competes. So when it comes to downfield range, and again, I think this is where the drawback is and where I probably put his more ideal fit for any team, not necessarily just the Chargers, considering the fact that they already have Chris Harris on their roster. But when I look at Elijah Molden, I don't see that type of downfield corner that they would need from some of the guys that we have already been talking about on this show. But Dan, I know you got a chance to actually speak to Elijah Molden, but when you put on the tape, what do you actually see when you look at him?
Yes, I did talk to Elijah Molden, and man, he is so humble. By the way, he tries his best to drown out the noise, doesn't care what anybody else thinks, and just tries to bring the lunch pail and do the best he can do every single day. What I see in Elijah Molden is the best nickel corner in the draft, and I don't think it's close. He's amazing in run support, and you kind of mentioned, I think he makes his money in the box, center of the field. Great in run support. I think he's a really hard hitter. Never gives up on a play. He was a first-team All Pac-12 in both 2019 and 2020. Just a really physical, but also a very smart and very cerebral player. You don't often see him in the wrong position, but to your point, He wants to keep people in front of him. Don't let him get out wide, out long, because he can get ran by. But again, it's all about putting him in the right scheme, the right system. For what he is, I think he is fantastic. And put in the right scheme, I think he's going to shine. I think he's going to be a Desmond King plus with upside.
That's funny, because I I like the comparison, because I've seen plenty of analysts actually give a pro comparison to Desmond King for him. But your analogy of saying that he could be a Desmond King plus, I totally agree. The interesting part about that is that Desmond King had that versatility to play both inside and outside. But if we're just talking about him as strictly a nickel corner, which again I think is his best fit at the next level, you're right. I think he's the best nickel corner in this draft for a DB, no question about it. And I think if someone drafts him there to exclusively play him there, he's going to thrive.
Amen. Now, a lot of these guys that we've talked to, Jake, I think have gotten some respect and have gotten hyped. But this next guy, I feel like has just been dragged for months and finally got his redemption at his pro day.
Wow.
When he just blazed with a 4.25 40 and shut up a lot of people. I actually had a chance to talk to Eric Stokes out of Georgia, and he just wants people to put some respect on his name.
Question for the NFL, I guess, more thinking about your skill sets. Is there a particular skill set that you think NFL teams will desire most? And then where do you see yourself stacking with the rest of the corners in this draft?
Pretty much with the second part, like I pretty much just believe like I'm one of the best to where like if like I'm just trying to solidify that it's like I'm not that underrated to where like I got some type of buzz with me to where I need some type of respect. That's all I'm asking for. But it is what it is, you know. I'm used to being that underdog. I'm used to being all that like that stuff. So
that is Eric Stokes out of Georgia, and he has some things to prove. I mean, you hear all the talk about those guys at the top, but how quickly you forget about an Eric Stokes. And you watch the tape on him, this guy is like a cat, man. 6'1", 190-ish. He's both quick and fast, which you don't often see. Normally, you'll see someone long legs fast or short legs quick. He is both. First team All-SEC, All-SEC in 2020. Second team in 2019. He was second in the SEC with 4 interceptions. And there was one play, Jake, where he was blitzing the Tennessee quarterback, I forget his name, and just lit him up. Didn't even see him, rocked it for a fumble. It was insane. Also had a punt block for a touchdown. I don't know if you saw that. And I love watching him because he's going up against the best of the best in college football, going up against SEC wide receivers, and holds his own. And he always has his hands on footballs. I know there are a bunch of guys out here. There's a bunch of guys on Georgia. I think Eric Stokes is the best one of them, and he is the most fun to watch of all of them.
You know, you mentioned it, Dan, at the top of the conversation about Stokes, just talking about people, you know, weren't giving him enough attention before he went out there and ran his 40 at 4.25. It's such a cool story. I mean, obviously, that's track speed. And that's exactly what Eric Stokes' background was, especially in high school, because he ran track in high school. And he was actually, when he came to Georgia, he was actually supposed to compete on the Bulldogs track and field team. And then there was one football spring practice that he participated in, and that basically changed everything. So,
You're like, I can run fast and I can hit people?
Hey,
yes.
you know, the defensive coordinator at Georgia was definitely like, that guy, give him over here now. But like you mentioned, Dad, the speed is the one thing that stands out with him the most. But on top of that, again, he plays to his size really well. He's got a great frame, great length on top of it. He's capable of keeping up, more than capable of keeping up with, you know, the fast wide receivers of today's game. He's physical. He battles opponents, very well as far as, whether it comes to tackling or going after the ball. He plays like a dog. He plays like a dog and plays like a guy who he just feels that everyone is doubting him. And I'm very interested to see what he's going to be. Again, he has a more ideal frame that you want to see out of a bigger cornerback. Could probably use a little bit more poundage as far as size goes.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, there's going to be some learning curves that he's going to have to overcome at the next level very early on. But I think with his intangibles, his speed, his size, his tenacity that he approaches the game, I think he's going to end up being a very nice corner in this league. And so my question to you, Dan, is if Eric Stokes was a possibility for the Chargers, where do you see his sweet spot that if the Chargers were to trade back? Because to me, it would probably have to be anywhere around that 24 to 25 range to where it would make sense for the Eric Stokes conversation if the Chargers were indeed to look his direction.
My first thought when you asked me this was, Jake, where do the Raiders pick?
Yeah, fastest guy. Bam.
Yeah.
That's a future Las Vegas Raider right there.
Yep. So Raiders are at 17. I would not be shocked if they go Eric Stokes. Right there.
Yep. He's the pick.
But no, I think realistically, he should go, I would guess, probably in the mid-20s, early 20s, most likely. But someone is going to fall in love with that speed and pick him earlier than he is projected to go. And I don't blame him. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Las Vegas at 17 decides to pull the trigger if those top three are off the board.
I want to talk about one of my favorite cornerback prospects in this.
Your boy.
This is my boy. This is another one of my size be damned cornerback prospects in this draft. And if the football gods are good, if the football gods do decide to bless the Chargers in this upcoming draft, as the many people have wanted to look at the perfect scenario that if the Chargers were to go offensive tackle at their pick at 13 and then come around in the second round and hope that this individual is still on the board with their second round pick at 47, Asante Samuel Jr. out of Florida State. He literally has, to me, risen up the board so much that I wouldn't even be surprised if he was to sneak into the end of round one. I really hate to burst the bubble for people. The realistic scenario of Asante Samuel Jr. being available on the board at 47 is probably highly unlikely.
What is more likely? Kyle Pitts at 13
or
Asante Samuel at 47?
At least you're catering to the crowd and putting me in a position of what's more realistic to happen, because it's without a doubt Asante Samuel being there at 47. You need to stop with the Kyle Pitts at 13 conversation right now, and you need to stop with the possibility of the Chargers trading up to go get Kyle Pitts at 4 with Atlanta. Stop it. We're not even on tight ends yet, and I don't want to hear it.
Fair enough.
I don't want to hear it. Now going back to Asante Samuel Jr. again, size be damned. This dude plays like a dog. You know what the crazy part about it is that literally his size dimensions, whether you're talking about his height or his weight, are literally identical to his father when he was playing in the NFL. So anybody that wants to say that he's too small, can't do this at the next level, screw that. He's going to come out and prove everybody wrong. And he's one of these type of guys, when you go back and you talk about a difference of an Eric Stokes, virtually both Stokes and Samuel Jr. are the same size, but Samuel has that position versatility to where he can handle himself on the outside. I know people would automatically look at him and say, hey, he's 5'10". He's automatically got to be a nickel cornerback. No, he can play both inside, outside, has that versatility if you need to have him. Very physical, quick hips, very smart, very good read react to receivers and reading their routes. Again, very good in man coverage while also playing very well in the zone as well. I've said as well way too many times in that sentence. Excuse me. But again, any receivers that are aggressive with him, he's going to be aggressive right back. I just really like how he approaches the game for a guy that doesn't have the blessings of being over 6 feet tall. And again, plays it like a dog. Plays it like a dog and plays it with that type of swagger that you want to see from a defensive back. So I really like what I've seen from him on film. We go back and you watch his tape at Florida State, and what this kid is going to do, again, coming from at his prime, one of the best defensive backs to ever play the game back when Asante Samuel Jr. was on top of when Asante Samuel was on top of the world. He comes from a great pedigree. And you love to see it. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do at the next level.
Asante Samuel Jr. is so fun to watch. And yes, he might be 5'9", 5'10", but when you watch him play, he plays so much bigger than that. First team All ACC in 2020, and he makes his money on the outside. A lot of times when you see folks with that height, they'll usually do best inside. Not him. He actually performs at his best on the outside. He lays the hammer. He is a thumper. Incredible ball skills. I think one of the things that I like most about him was his reaction time. He was so quick. His quick twitch was amazing and just has zero regard for his body. He de-gaffs about what's going to feel like. Jake, did you see that one play? I forget who it was against where he almost picked off a screen.
Yes.
It was like a wide receiver screen, and he blew up the wide receiver who was actually trying to cover or block for him, and just almost picked it off. Halfway in the air, hit on the ground. It was gnarly. He's probably top 3 most favorite to watch of these corners, and that's just because of the energy he brings, the tenacity, the just grit, and he just doesn't care how tall anybody is. Doesn't matter. He reminds me of, I forget his name, it's going to screw me up, the corner last year, Jake, who was size be damned, who we both loved. I forget who got him. Did he go to the Raiders? Amik Robinson, who I believe went to the Raiders last year, has almost the same player profile. Small stature, size be damned, like Jake says. I really like Asante Samuel. I know this is your guy, but I kind of love him too.
Oh, hey. At least I know you're smart, Dan. So... At least I know you're smart for liking Asante Samuel Jr. That's good to know. Good for you, sir.
What is not to like about Asante Samuel Jr.? Is he the top corner in this draft? No. But is he someone that is going to succeed at the next level? 100%.
Again, we're talking about now in the thick of round 2, that if the Chargers do indeed go with what a lot of people predict that they will as far as targeting offensive tackle at 13, and then choosing to fill that cornerback position in round 2, we're looking at some of the guys who they could be having their eye on. Another one here, Dan. Tyson Campbell out of Georgia. Georgia was just filled with... with defensive back prospects for this draft. You have Eric Stokes, DJ Daniel, Mark Webb, and now another one, Tyson Campbell. Dan, another one of these bigger body type guys, 6'2", let me just say that again. Yeah, he was about 193. Dan, another one of these big body type guys, 6'2", 190. I really like from what I've been seeing from Tyson Campbell. Again, I think he started rising up draft boards a lot over the last couple of months. There's back in the day when people had him as a 3rd round prospect, and then he finally was starting to get that in that conversation in the 2nd round. But incredibly long and very quick corner too. Runs a sub 4.4. And again, he still has room to go in his frame. So I think he has a very high ceiling at the next level. Again, another one of these guys that just plays aggressive. That's his style of football. quick feet, quick hips. I really like it. And Dan, you should like this too. I hear you giving that little wince too, because I've seen pro comparisons to where they put Tyson Campbell compared to William Jackson III. Was one of the free agent targets that you actually wanted when he was released from the Bengals to possibly come over to the Chargers. But I know that didn't end up happening. But again, he's just another one of these type of guys that has great speed, great length. Again, the size that you'd want to see from what we've been talking about with these guys from Surtain, Horn, and Farley. He falls in that category as far as matching the size goes. Again, there's things that he still needs to develop. And Dan, that's probably what you're about to highlight right now, because I know you don't have as high of grade on him as I do. But he was the leader in one of the most dominant secondaries in college football last year. Yes, I know that he was surrounded by a litany of talent. We just talked about it a second ago. But I really like what I've seen from this kid. Could he develop into a number one? I won't go that far. But I think he would definitely add to a talented secondary if you're looking to remake it with the likes of Chris Harris, Derwin James, and Mike Davis.
So I think that might be where we differ a bit, is when I look at Tyson Campbell, I think he is kind of on the fringe of the first of the corners that I don't see being CB1. The rest of the guys we talked about before, aside from maybe Asante Samuel Jr., will have a tough time being CB1. I just don't know if I can trust the risk reward to draft Tyson Campbell as high as it might take to take him. In my opinion, I see him being kind of a round 3, like solid round 3, maybe early round 3, but round 3 guy. And it's not because of any kind of physical trait or anything like that. It's just because I'm not sure what he's going to look like when he develops his frame, when he develops a lot of those skills that he has yet to take in. Yes, he has the size, he has a lot of the traits that you want in a prototypical corner, but it's not there yet. And so if you're drafting for potential, this could be your guy. But for me and the Chargers need someone like right now. And I don't know if I can put all of my eggs in that basket. Now, that said, you mentioned it. This guy is like incredibly quick. He was actually a state champion in both the 100 and 200 meter dash in track and field at high school. So he has it. I'm just saying I think there's a bigger risk here than the guys above him. And that's why I'm a little bit lower on him than you.
So you would be okay with, very uncharacteristically, if the Chargers traded back from 47 and then decided to take Tyson Campbell. So that's probably the area that you would put him in then if he was worth a second round pick.
Totally, absolutely. I think he has great instincts. I think he's phenomenal pass breakup machine. Yeah, I would say early round 3, middle round 3, sweet spot. Love it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, then, if that's the case on where you view Tyson Campbell, I'm interested to know where you would put our next guy that we're going to talk about, Ifeatu Melifonwu. Dan, what do you see here?
So I see a second round pick. I see Ifeatu Melifonwu as a better corner than Tyson Campbell. 6'2", 200 plus. He's already filled out pretty well. Really, really good in press man, which I think would be great with Brandon Staley, Ronaldo Hill. You see him all the time disrupting the timing of wide receivers, which I think is a great, great trait. And that kind of points to his aggressiveness and physical play style. Really, really, really good run defender. Plays with a very smooth play style. I really like his lower body mechanics. If you watch his footwork and watch what he does waist down, it's actually really, really, really good. You watch him shut down wide receivers a lot. And one of the things that I look for in corners that I think he does weirdly well is he makes it look easier than it should. The things that he does that he makes look easy are not easy at all. But then there's other things that he doesn't really do as easily. But being able to lock down big wide receivers at the line is not an easy trait. And so I could see him being a very kind of versatile chess piece that could be played on the inside, outside for this Brandon Staley kind of, what's the word? Placebo. I can't think of the damn word. Amoeba defense that the Chargers are going to be running.
So now I know Dan almost mixed up placebo with amoeba. Mental note, check. You got anything else to add, or you want to keep talking about amoebas?
Nope, that's it. I'm going to stop at amoeba.
Okay, fair enough. All right. As Dan mentioned, Ifeatu Melifonwu, one of the biggest defensive backs in this class, not just by height. We're talking just overall size. Again, what was it, Dan? 6'2" or 6'3"?
I think he's an easy 6'2". He might be 6'3", but I think he had listed at 6'2".
6'2", but his size, what was it, 210 pounds, 212 pounds, I believe? Just, again, with a huge frame, finished with 26 passes defended, started 19 games, played in 29 during his time at Syracuse. As Dan mentioned, he has that versatility where he could play the ball well in zone coverage. If you want to put him in man, I think he needs to be a little bit more physical with that, but he's still versatile enough to where you can put him in a multitude of different schemes. Very capable, again, of having those instincts, jumping into the routes. That's where he gets those pass breakups from, of course. But he's got the size to where he could overpower wide receivers if he plays it correctly. Again, I see him more of a zone coverage specific type of corner. I think he can develop better traits in man coverage. The footwork to me just needs a little bit of cleaning up, but it's not anything that's really going to hinder anybody from saying that he can't cover receivers downfield very well.
I liked his footwork.
I mean, I'm not saying his footwork's the worst. I'm just saying it could just be cleaned up a little bit. That's all. Geez.
Okay.
Melifonwu police over here. Woo. Again, I'm just saying, could clean up the footwork just a little bit. But I really like what I see. And Dan, you have him as a solid second round grade, and so you think, hypothetically, and again, I'm just going off of what you had just said about Tyson Campbell. In comparison, do you see him having better starter traits than Tyson Campbell?
Yes, I do. At least early on in his NFL career, absolutely.
That's fair enough. I can get on board with that. And finally, to round out the, no pun intended, round 2 cornerbacks that we'd be looking at if the Chargers were to be selecting one indeed in the second round. Paulson Adebo out of Stanford. I really like this guy. To me, he was much more of you want to look at a guy who pads the stats. This definitely was your guy. 24 passes defended, 20 pass breakups, and 4 interceptions, along with 64 tackles that earned him all Pac-12 honors. Long, physical, has the ball skills that you're looking for to cover receivers. Very athletic. Plays fast, has good instincts. The ball control to track the ball in the air. And again, he has that size that you're looking for to match up with the wide receivers today in the NFL. Dan, go. I thought I was going to say something witty there, but then I'm like, no, just turn it over to Dan.
No, Paulson Adebo, he is a fun player to watch. So former wide receiver, which I think jumps off the tape immediately because you see his hands constantly. He has incredible hands. He was actually second team All-American in 2018, led the nation in passes defense with 24, actually had 4 picks that year. He plays super aggressively, and he has incredible reaction to wide receiver breaks, which I actually saw that before I learned he actually was a former wide receiver. And I was like, oh, makes sense.
There it is.
That makes sense. He turns his head really fast, which I don't know if that's because he reads the routes well or reads the quarterback well or both, but his head is always around. And of all of the corners, he actually, I think, has the best interception highlight SportsCenter top 10 material. He has a diving interception, one-handed grab in the end zone, like a diving long reception. And I was like, woo, love it. I really like Paulson Adebo. I think he's just a solid corner, solid second-round pick, really good length. He actually reminds me a bit of a Chris Harris Jr. play style. Very scrappy. I love what he brings. I think he's super aggressive. I love his kind of chip on his shoulder that he brings. Yeah, he's good. I think he's going to be a underrated corner that gets taken in this draft.
Dan, would he be your selection at 47, or do you think that would be a little bit too rich for Paulson Adebo?
It would depend on who's left on the board, but if a Melifonwu and if like a Asante Samuel Jr. are gone and Stokes is gone and Molden's gone, yeah, I'd take him. He's good. He's good. It might be a bit of a stretch, but if it means not getting a corner, because I think there's a definite break here between the guys we've talked to and the next segment. I think he's kind of on the end of that segment. So if it's between getting him and not, yeah, I would take a flyer on it.
Fair enough. Well, as Dan mentioned there, we still have more corners to talk about. This cornerback class is not short on good defensive backs. It's deep. So we're going to be talking about when we come up next. We're going to be talking about guys that we look at possibly in round 3 or beyond that the Chargers could look to add to their defensive secondary. Talking nothing but cornerbacks today on Chargers Unleashed. We'll be right back.
Y'all gonna make me lose my mind. Up in here, up in here. Y'all gonna make me go all out. Up in here, up in here. Y'all gonna make me act a fool.
Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
One, two, meet me outside. Meet me outside. Meet me outside. Don't meet me outside.
Welcome back to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. We are wrapping up our positional deep dive into the cornerback position. We've already talked about the guys that we could look at for the Chargers to select at 13 overall. We've talked about the possible trade down scenarios if the Chargers wanted to trade back from 13 and target a cornerback there. We've talked about guys that we could possibly see as round 2 if they indeed end up having to fill that left tackle position with their first round pick and come back around in round 2 to fill their defensive back void. But Dan, this cornerback class is so deep that it wouldn't surprise me if you didn't see a corner taken at 13 or in a trade down scenario or in round 2, and you saw one taken possibly in round 3 or even beyond that. So Dan and I are going to rapid fire off a number of guys that each one of us like. And I know Dan is going to start off here with someone that he really, really likes when he puts on his tape. Keith Taylor out of Washington. Dan, floor is yours, sir.
Keith Taylor, actually fell in love with him as I was watching his tape. We're going to roll in the deep, as we say, with Keith Taylor. Great size, 6'3". I think he is great and will be great at man-to-man. Consistent player, amazing football IQ. Kind of weird. No interceptions on his tape, but partially because his hands were kind of not good. But the other part was because he didn't have many opportunities because balls were thrown way over his and the receiver's head. Really, really good speed, plays very physical. Press man is his strength. He looks and plays a lot like a Richard Sherman type. Great size, 6'3". Keith Taylor would be a super fun round 3 pick. Wouldn't be pissed at all.
I love the comments there. Again, I like what I see from Keith Taylor as well when I turn on the film, and Dan touched on it there. Very good traits that you want to see from a guy that you could possibly get in the 3rd round. Another guy that I really like in this draft, Dan. Now, let me preface this first by saying I put Aaron Robinson out of Central Florida. Not only is he in the size be damned category, obviously one of the smaller cornerbacks in this draft, but he falls more in that line to where I feel like his best NFL fit is probably not going to be with the Chargers, because I think that where he's going to succeed more is going to be strictly as a nickel corner. Now, when he was at Central Florida, he showed the versatility enough to play both inside and outside, but because of his size and his skill set and where he thrives, I think he's better suited for the nickel. Again, he's very quick, good transition, good foot agility. I really like what I see from this kid. He could still play well in press, very good route recognition, but I just think that there's a little bit the things that you really want to see from a downfield corner. I feel like he would need to refine at the next level. So if he's going to have early success, it's most likely going to be more as a nickel cornerback. But I definitely see him as someone as a consideration. It's definitely in round 3, but the speed is going to be the biggest thing for him. Yes, he's quick, but the downfield speed that you would normally want to see from a starting caliber outside corner, I don't know if he's going to possess that. Again, I think he's a great player, but as far as just an overall fit for the Chargers, I don't see it. If Chris Harris was not on this team, I would say, sure, absolutely, go ahead and pull the trigger, because I think that he would work well in the slot role for our defense. But just given the circumstances, I think there's still a little bit questions that need to be answered on Aaron Robinson.
Fair enough. Let's keep the train rolling. Next guy on our list, one we are no stranger to, our very own Izzy Mukuamu. We actually had him on our show. We got to talk to him for a bit. This guy, self-proclaimed unicorn, he is 6'3", I think 205. He's arguably, I think he might be the biggest corner in this draft. You hear a lot of people say he could potentially play both safety or corner, depending on where folks see him fitting most. You immediately find that he has a knack for the football, has 7 career interceptions. I think one game alone, he had 3 picks. Very lengthy frame, long strides. Again, another one of those Richard Sherman type. I think he is being slept on mightily, and he's going to go much higher than if folks have him going, and you see him on like Draft Network and other folks having him going. He is going to be in day 2. I wouldn't be shocked at all if it's mid-round 3. Izzy Mukuamu is going to get someone excited and is going to make someone look good when he is picked up. South Carolina, 2 bona fide cornerbacks, Jaycee Horn, Izzy Mukuamu.
Dan, to touch on that, Izzy was indeed our first player interview that we had on our shows to start off this offseason. And we're both on the Izzy train. Ceiling and floor for Izzy Mukuamu. Give it to me.
In terms of draft position?
In terms of draft position, yes.
The highest I see him getting drafted will be early round 3. Lowest, late 4th. And that's a steal.
That's fair enough. I like it. Last guy that we're going to mention on tonight's show, because we have gone through a plethora of DBs in this draft, is Kelvin Joseph out of Kentucky. I really like what I see from Kelvin Joseph. The only thing that scares me here, and which probably knocks his draft stock down, well, one of the reasons why, is just the lack of experience. It makes me timid. And I really like what I see from him. Again, ran a 4.34 in his 40. He's got those physical dimensions that you like to see from a corner who can play outside. He's very gifted athletically. The traits and all of that aspect, especially when it comes to run defense, are there. He does have his moments, though, where he could be undisciplined, get a little grabby, the penalties start coming out, but he's got the talent that you can work with to develop a good addition to the secondary. again, he has the size, he has the ball skills. He can challenge wide receivers. When he's on his game, he can put up a good fight and really just be a dog against opposing wide receivers. I really like what I see from him. He just needs to clean up his game just a little bit. And if you put him in a good situation with a good defensive coordinator to clean up some of those just little mistakes, he could be a huge sleeper and a great get for someone.
Yeah, I'm so conflicted with Kelvin Joseph because half the time I'm like round one talent, baby. Half the time I'm like undrafted.
Right.
And it's tough. It's tough because like he shows flashes where you're like, dang, this guy just picked off Mac Jones and was going up against Devontae Smith and made it look easy. Another time you're like, does he play corner? I can't tell. I think it was Trevor Sickman that talked about him on a previous show of his where he mentioned how like waist up, waist down,
right?
Great.
Yes.
And it's apparent when you put on the tape. Like he has amazing feet, really, really good ball skills, plays very physical, but I think he needs to develop. And it's hard for me to see my team pick him as their corner that needs to start right away.
Yeah, that's not happening.
If I could give him to Brandon Staley as like the second corner we get, I am through the roof. Because I think someone like a Brandon Staley in this kind of scheme that can play to his versatility and develop him, I think that's what he needs. But he is not well-rounded enough to start right now, and he is going to get exposed by NFL receivers if he is put on islands right now. He has the potential, and I think is a developmental gold mine, but I am not putting my trust on that side of the field starting out in the NFL.
No. Now, I love the idea that you said if you're giving him to Brandon Staley as a long-term developmental type of defensive back. I mean, if you want to make an argument for it, look what Brandon Staley and those defensive coordinators did with the Rams secondary. If you look outside of Jalen Ramsey, who was a first-round talent, that secondary was made up of picks that were third rounds and lower. So Brandon Staley has that type of experience with lower, I guess, what would you call it, Dan? Lower drafted assets, especially in the secondary, that he's able to develop and groom. So, yeah, I would think that Kelvin Joseph would fall right into that type of category. But I am 100% in agreement with you. Is this the guy that you're starting opposite Mike Williams, or I was about to say Mike Williams, Mike Davis on week 1? No, sir.
No. And there's a bunch of guys, and again, we're talking about kind of the top of the classes. We're talking about the rounds 1 through 3, fringe round 4 guys. There's a ton of guys that we're not even talking about right now. Honorable mentions, so to speak, who we could talk about, but I don't see us waiting that long to get a corner, and I don't think you do either, Jake.
Nope.
A couple guys real quick. There's a couple guys that I actually really like that I don't want people to be surprised. So for people who want to know a little bit about a couple of these players, Robert Rochelle out of Central Arkansas. I actually really, really, really like him. He ran a 4.3 40, 43-inch vertical. Actually played running back and wide receiver. Very raw as a corner, but I think he's going to be good. Look out for him. We talked about Aaron Robinson already. Trey Brown, another guy I think you are really high on him. Marco Wilson from Florida. DJ Daniel, I think is going to be pro-ready a lot sooner than some of these guys we haven't talked about. He actually did really well against both Denzel Mims and Jamar Chase, weirdly enough. And then my favorite name of all corners in this draft class, Mr. Rashad Wildgoose from Wisconsin. I would 100% take a late round flyer on him because of his name alone, but also he's a great open field tackler, and he's aggressive, and I love his size. I can keep going, but I don't think our listeners care.
Any more, Dan? Are you sure? We've almost covered the 86 cornerbacks that are in this draft.
No, I'm out of breath. I need a drink. But again, I think this speaks to the quality and the depth at the cornerback position. And this is arguably the deepest, if not one of the top 2 or 3 deepest positions in the entire draft. Would you agree?
Oh, no question. No question at all. You say wide receiver and DB, and you can even make an argument for the offensive tackle. I think those are your top 3 as far as being with both talent and just overall depth as far as players that would be great additions to this team. So that's going to wrap up our long, drawn out, deep dive into the DB prospects of this draft. That just felt like vomit of the mouth for the better part of an hour. But Dan, good job, sir. Good job. Got through it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We did it. So many corners in this draft class. I cannot wait to see where all these guys go. But man, I'm going to be stressed out watching the draft, huh? Jeez.
You know, that's what that thing called alcoholic beverages are for, Dan. So those definitely help in moments of stress. But then they can also really fuel you with anger, you know, if you end up picking a player that you don't want.
It's a slippery slope both ways.
Yeah. So you ride the waves, dude. You ride the waves. It's part of the danger. Anyways, please go on Twitter and follow the show at LAC_Unleashed, myself at JT Hefner, and of course, Dan Wolkenstein at Chargers Homer. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're not done. 2 weeks notice, 2 weeks away from the draft, 14 days. We still have a crap ton of positional breakdowns to do before April 29th arrives. So you're going to see us very soon, probably later on this week. And we're going to leave it to you again, and the fans, of picking the next position that is going to be talked about, and for Dan and I to break down a number of different prospects at these positions of need. So thank you guys so much again for listening. We'll see you next time on Chargers Unleashed.
We are less than 2 bare naked ladies away from the draft, and I cannot wait. We'll see you soon, Chargers fans.
Lose my mind. Up in here, up in here.